Mansfield today, hi, nice to have you with us. And we've decided to do a Q&A show because we get plenty of questions in and we sort of back them up until we've got enough to do enough general ones, because a lot of them are very specific. And apply to one particular condition or position or place or whatever you want to call it. So we take the general ones, which can help the broader viewers in this particular gardening show. So if we don't get to your question, it's not because we don't like you. It's just that we've sifted through these questions, and these are the ones that come up as a trend in them. Melanie Walker, our little gnomelet, hello.
Good morning, Jeremy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Melanie not with us in the studio. She's out and about doing Melanie things, which usually end up in chaos.
Inevitably, one hopes, at least.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, Mel, let's try and get through as quickly as we possibly can, get through as many of these that we can. Hi, Mel, this is Beryl from Southbroom. She says, I've downloaded some of your podcasts. I follow you wherever I can, and recently found you on Mansfield today. You work on about composting. I find it incredibly hard to compost. Am I missing something that you aren't?
When it comes to composting, there is that myth. And today, I think a lot of the stuff that's come up has been about myths and mistakes, okay? Because people do tend to make mistakes by making everything overly complicated. And when it comes to composting, that's one of the things that definitely gets too complicated if you start reading online and thinking, oh, this is what I should be doing. Frankly, you know what? It's really, really easy. There's this thing that you should have a magic formula where you've got your greens to your browns and the temperature and how much water you should put in and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But essentially, if you think about how composting works out in nature, stuff just happens, okay? It doesn't have us coming and watering it and making sure there's a layer of this and a layer of that. Things just happen. So what you need to do is just make sure that you have a place which is dedicated to that. You can do it in a bag. I mean, you can compost leaves in a bag. You can do all kinds of things. You don't need complicated or expensive equipment unless you really want to have that to make the neighbors jealous. But I don't think you could probably be doing anything wrong unless you only have like very much brown material. When we talk about brown material, we're talking about dried leaves, we're talking about dried out grass clippings, cardboard, chipped up branches, that kind of thing. And then your greens are kind of leaves and all the stuff that's still green that you've been cutting out. If you just layer things like that, there's no perfect ratio, but just don't make sure it's one or the other. And that's it. It's easy.
Okay, Paleso from Mamelodi. What did you know? She says this is how her mom used to garden, so this is how she gardens, and everyone says to her she doesn't need to. In raised beds.
Mm-hmm. Raised beds, very nice for gardens if you want to create a nice little design feature. Also, if you've got a bad back. Okay, because obviously getting down onto the ground, it's not going to be like that comfortable if you've got a bad back. Although I would suggest that if you have a bad back, you should be doing a lot more outside and doing Pilates outside, actually. But in nature, you don't see raised beds that often, do you?
No.
If you've got limited space, maybe I would say do that. And it's just nice if you're doing like a little keyhole garden and you haven't got much space and you want to plant down the sides as well. Sure, go for it. But it doesn't actually make economic sense, okay? As I said, unless you're going to spend money on making it look like a lovely feature, you have to pay to get those raised beds. If you've got really, really bad soil, if you have clay soil, which you have a problem amending, then sure, you can build yourself a little raised bed and put the stuff in. But then you're also going to have to pay to fill those beds up. okay, which doesn't make economic sense either. So I would always say, first of all, dig down into your soil and try and amend the soil as best as possible. Some people say, that you're only going to get really good, healthy stuff and the bugs are not going to come up there if you're in a raised bed. Trust me, those bugs are still going to come there. They say, they're not going to get as many weeds. Trust me, weeds are opportunistic. They are still going to be there. And in fact, you're not going to save money on watering because the water drains out of the beds a lot quicker than if you're watering straight into the ground. So, I mean, from an aesthetic point of view or from a bad back point of view, I would say sure. But you know what? Ultimately, not necessary.
Okay. Listen, well then let's continue on the soil and drainage theme from Otto. Otto is from Namibia. He says, does adding sand to clay soil make it better draining?
No, makes it into concrete. If you think about it logically, okay, if you take sand and you put it in with clay, what's it going to do? It's going to bind together and it's going to get hard. So that's not going to work. And I know that a lot of times over the years, people have said if you've got really bad clay soil and it's very waterlogged, then you add sand to make it more kind of loose. Best thing to do, as I always say, is to add compost. Any organic material is going to improve the soil better than anything else and make it a lot more aerated. So no, do not add any sand to your clay soil. That's it. Done. Sorted.
Okay. We can ring fence all of these here. Banana peels in the garden are a great way to feed your plants. Coffee grounds can be good, but mostly not. And this one from Gerald, who lives in or around Dulstrom. Pine needles acidify your soil. And what's the last? There are two more. Adding sugar to soil around tomatoes will make them sweeter. And what is the whole hoo-ha about Epsom salts?
All very good things. Yeah, soil amendments. I mean, obviously, if we take off food scraps and put them into the garden, it's generally going to improve your soil in the long run. If you don't have a compost heap, you can do in soil composting by just digging a hole, putting all of your stuff in there. You can take the stuff from your bokashi if you've already put everything into a bokashi. But some people will say, go and bury your banana peels. It'll give your soil a potassium boost. Well, yeah, no, potassium is a good thing. Your plants and everything do need potassium to flower and fruit nicely. But burying the peels whole can actually backfire because if you're putting it into the ground rather, the soil microorganisms then break down the peels, okay? So they're going to be taking nitrogen out of the soil to be able to do that, which means that there's less nitrogen for the leaves of the plant because the nitrogen goes for the leaves, whereas the potassium goes for the flowers and fruit. So the best place for banana peels, frankly, I think is in a compost pile where they can break down or in your bokashi bin. Okay, so they'll break down in an anaerobic position there. And you need, if you want to give your plants the best nutrition, other than fertilizer, of course, top dressing with compost is the best way to go. Now, when it comes to coffee grounds, they are acidic. Mixing them into the soil can affect the pH of the soil, but very, very slowly. Think about how few coffee grounds you're actually going to be putting into the soil. You'd have to put a lot more. And just like with the banana peels, okay, fresh coffee grounds can also tie up nitrogen as they decompose, which is taking it away from the plants as well. So if you want to use, you can use, there's nothing wrong with using the coffee grounds in the soil or in your compost heap or in your bokashi. But if you want to lower your soil's pH, if you've got very high pH, and you don't want to have a nitrogen deficiency, then rather get a sulfur-based soil acidifier. and amend the soil like that, or use an acid-based compost. What was the other one? Eggshells? What was it? Eggshells? No.
No.
Epsom salts.
No,
My
there was
goodness.
Epsom salts, and there was also sugar
Those are pine
around.
needles and sugar. Okay.
Yeah.
So pine needles, that's also one of those things where there may be a little bit of it truth in it, but on the whole, it's a bit of a myth. You can, because they are quite acidic when they are fresh, use them around plants that like acid soil, blueberries, rhododendrons, azaleas, that kind of thing. But those are taken straight from the tree and put in. As they dry out, they actually lose that acidity, which means that pine straw, actually the dried out needles aren't acidic in any way or form, so they'll do nothing. They're quite nice as using as a compost, but they're no longer acidic. When it comes to putting sugar, I don't know where this came from, but if you put sugar around your tomatoes will get sweet. Do you really think that the tomatoes are clever enough? Well, actually, they are clever. Should I say stupid enough to actually be sucking up sugar when they're sucking up proper nutrients? Getting sweetness? Nah, it's nonsense. Okay, frankly, I wouldn't do it. Epsom salts, my goodness, Epsom salts has been used as one of those things that you can put it into anything and it's going to make all kinds of stuff. Blossom end rot, which happens when you're growing courgettes or what are those other big purple things, eggplants and stuff. They say if you put a scoop of Epsom salts into each hole when you're planting either your tomatoes or any of those things, you know what? In fact, it does not stop blossom end rot. It actually leads to more of it. So don't do that. Don't put Epsom salt into each hole when you're planting anything, because it can actually create more rot, because magnesium and calcium ions will then compete for the uptake into the plant. Okay, and your plants just go completely haywire. So don't do it. So you know what, if you just use a balanced fertilizer, don't use this. I don't know where this whole thing came in about using Epsom salts for everything. Don't. Just use what's really good for the plant. I think that Ludwig Taschner has also said, yeah, sure, the Epsom salts, but it's the same as putting salt into your soil. So great, you can use salt to get rid of weeds, but I would only use it if it's like in paving, because then the salt will actually go into the soil, which is not great for your soil. It's like adding bleach or adding kind of any chemicals, because they're basically chemicals, okay? So it doesn't control pests either, okay? It's completely useless for pest control. No diseases. There's no scientific proof that diseases are controlled by Epsom salts. It's not a miracle product. Okay, if your soil has got enough magnesium, it won't help your plants to grow bigger, and it won't make more flowers, and it won't make your tomatoes bigger, although we're not planting tomatoes at this time of the year. I'm just using it as an example. What was the other one, Jeremy?
I've lost it now.
Don't worry, I lost it years ago. I've been out to lunch for years as well. It was the Epsom salts, sugar. I think we've gone through all of them, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we may have.
Done it.
Okay. Why do we plant? I never thought of this actually. It's very interesting. Why do we plant trees in a round shape bowl into a square hole? And it's true. You take your tree out of the plastic it's in. It's round, and you dig a square hole. And then you put it in there.
Well, I think it's, it changes from over the years. I know that at one stage, everybody said, no, it's round peg, round hole, square peg, square hole. So why are we putting something that's round into a square? Because they were sitting there and saying, well, if you plant your tree into a round hole, what's going to happen is that the roots are going to go round and round, because you're obviously digging a hole, making the soil loose, but it's still hard around the outsides. Yeah. So then the roots are not going to be able to break through the sides. But at least if it's in the corners like that, it'll stop the roots from going round and round. They'll go out like this. But logically, they are strong little things. If you think about what roots do, okay, where they grow out, they're going to find their way wherever they want to go in search of food and water. So frankly, I don't think it really matters all that much. As I said, it changes from years to year. So the latest one is to have like a shallow, not a hole per se, But to take like a basin out like this and then plant your tree and backfill it up around it. The square hole thing is a total myth. If you go and you Google that, you'll see lots of people saying you need to dig a square hole, but you'll never actually find any verifiable results because roots are tough, okay? They will pull up pavements, they'll pull up paving, they will do their own thing. The only time I would say that you might need to give a tree a little bit of help and maybe putting it into a square hole, it's not actually even a whole shape. It's when your tree has been kept in a pot or in a bag for too long and it's become a bit root bound. So you might just need to tease the roots out a little bit and make the whole area a little bit more friable so it's not so hard in the soil. So the roots have an easier way of getting out. But now forget about the square hole unless you want to put a round peg in a square hole. We're quite keen on doing that, aren't we?
Exactly. Melanie, you shouldn't water at midday because you'll burn the plants.
That is one thing that we've been told for years and years and years about when to water your plants. Now, the fact is, watering in the morning is definitely a better idea, okay? Because then the soil has a chance to, especially in summertime, to dry out a bit so that you don't have too much humidity around the plants. And that then leads to diseases and to fungal diseases specifically. But when you're watering, they say, look, I mean, obviously try not to water onto the plant itself unless it's looking a bit dusty and it could do with a bit of washing off. But it doesn't actually burn the plant. And I don't know where, I'm sure that maybe if it's an incredibly hot day, I sit and I remember how long it used to take me if I had a little magnifying glass and I was really compressing those sun rays into one space. I couldn't burn anything, really. It took forever. You'd have to hold it forever like that, okay? Why would you think that watering outdoor plants in the sun scalds the leaf? Because it can't. It has to actually be such a big piece of water to magnify the sun so much and so for so long. But in fact, that little piece of water will probably have dried up already anyway. So it is, I suppose, it's people sitting there and going, well, it's the heat of day. So that's when you shouldn't be watering. So maybe it'll stop you from doing it then. But also remember which areas you're in and when you're allowed to water your plants. I think we're still only allowed to water our gardens before 8 o'clock in the morning in Johannesburg and after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But I would suggest definitely it's not a myth that you water in the morning. It's definitely the best. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Final question here from Arno. Wanting to know whether cutting the grass in winter as short as possible makes it more green in summer.
Nah, depends on the grass as well. But cutting your grass shorter to make it longer in winter. Well, if you take into account that your kikuyu or your running grasses, a lot of them are actually winter dormant plants. So you don't want to be, I think we talked about this before, you don't want to be watering your lawn the whole way through winter trying to keep it green because the grass needs to actually rest. Now, during cooler months, obviously your grass grows at a much slower rate. You should actually, rather than cutting it shorter, raise your cutting height a little bit more or leave it at the regular height. But don't take it down. You mustn't take it so that it's less than 3 centimeters, depending on the grass type as well. Big risk of mowing low is that you might scalp your plant. And if you scalp your lawn, you're exposing your roots and runners to cold, to frost. So they need that bit of thatch to keep the roots kind of warm so they don't get frozen or frosted over the winter months. It's a lovely little layer of insulation. So no, don't. It's a total fiction that keeping your grass short over winter is actually going to help your plants. Don't do it. Okay? You need to keep your lawn long for it to be lush. Keep it tidy of leaves though, because it might steal sunlight from your lawn. So scrape all of the leaves off, put them into a bag, put them on the side, and use that as a mulch.
Okay. Final, sorry, I said that was the last one, but final one, purely
There's always
because,
one more, hey?
yeah, purely because of the person's name and where they're from.
Yeah.
This email comes from Belgium, from a guy or girl by the name of Fis, and he or she writes, "Dear Jeremy and Melanie, thank you for the show. I always find it very entertaining and informative." And Fis says, "Is Google any help in gardening?"
That depends on where you are. Google is your friend, but sometimes Google is not your friend because it depends on whether you're in the southern or the northern hemisphere. And this is a problem that we have a lot of the time with people saying, oh, but it says on Google. I mean, like, yes, it may have done, but that is relating to the northern hemisphere. So to, what is it, Fis? Fis in Belgium. Fis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he or she actually says, I know what it means in Afrikaans, as
Yeah.
Afrikaans is very close to Belgian.
To Flemish, yes.
So I'm going no further on that particular part of it. But I just love the
Okay,
name.
so basically up there, anything that you're reading or listening to us, I mean, a lot of the information that we give out obviously is relatable for wherever in the world you are, basically on how to make compost and things like that. But when it comes to your watering regimes, when you should be doing stuff, obviously the seasons are completely the other way around between the north and the south, okay? Mm-hmm. And plants will be doing different things at different times. And I think we've mentioned this before, where we've sat there and had people coming in, just, I want to grow tomatoes now. And we're like, well, no, sorry, you can't, because it's just the wrong time. This is not the time to be having your dahlias suddenly popping up, although they're talking about dahlias over, say, in England, because it is the time for them there. So Google sometimes cannot be your friend. If you're going onto the internet to get gardening information, always put in South Africa and make sure that whatever you're reading has got information there about South Africa and not about America or Europe, because otherwise you're just going to have everything false about ace.
First, hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully it answers a fair amount of questions. Keep them coming, and every now and again what we'll do is we'll do these sort of shows and just grab some topics which are of interest and of a broad range, and we'll try and address those. Mel, thank you very much for all of your help.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And we'll catch you next week.
I'll see you next week, indeedly. Have a good one.
Wonderful. Melanie Walker, our little green-fingered guru. And from Mansfield today, hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you next time round. Bye-bye.